Duh.
Following 2021's The Suicide Squad, James Gunn delved back into the DCEU with Peacemaker Season 1. And ladies and gentlemen, we're going to be talking about and reviewing that season today. Ladies and gentlemen, Peacemaker Season 1 first came out in January of 2022, debuting with its first 3 episodes on the streaming service previously known as Max. There's a lot to break down here, so let's go ahead and dive right into it. But before we do, ladies and gentlemen, I'm K-Swope. Thank you for tuning in. I'm the only YouTuber you know that views Jimmy Buffett as a role model. Also, before I get too carried away, okay? The Peacemaker intro, opening credit sequence, fire. It is so good. It is one of the best things I think James Gunn has ever done and directed. Love it so much. Check this out. It is phenomenal stuff. Trust me, mark my words. After rewatching this season, I have noticed 3 plots: A plot, B plot, and C plot. We're going to be talking about each of those individually and giving them a rating, and then at the end, we're going to give it a massive rating on a scale from 1 to 10. 1 being sensation of stepping on a Lego brick, 10 being the Citizen Kane of television, I suppose. But before we do any of that, we have to talk about the characters. The reason we got to talk about the characters is because James Gunn is very great with character-driven stories, drama, that kind of stuff, and so his characters are very lovable. So I think it's important for us to take some time and talk about the characters a little bit. So, diving right into things, Peacemaker, obviously, Christopher Smith, our star, John Cena himself. He is the title character. He is also a lovable bully, meaning he's a bit of a jerk, but like you can't really hate him because he's just got this kind of charm about him, and he can kind of play the ignorance card every now and then. But the root of his character development comes from this. He's really tough on the outside, and we see that a lot in the Suicide Squad. But on the inside, he's actually a really big softy, and we kind of see his walls, if you will, sort of start coming down at certain points in the show, and that's kind of where we get his character arc, character-driven stuff. This plays a lot into the A plot and B plot, which we will talk about in just a minute. Before we do, though, we got to talk about Vigilante, aka Adrian Chase. He's basically everyone's favorite character in the show, mine included. James Gunn takes a really interesting approach to the character. He basically makes him like Deadpool, but without the special forces training or anything like that makes Deadpool actually, really good at what it is that he does. He is also Christopher Smith, Peacemaker's biggest fan, and he is constantly trying to get recognition from him and almost sort of be seen as his best friend, which is kind of, really, really funny. Trying to always gain his favor, things like that. He's often very ignorant, which makes for some hilarious moments. Chris can be a little bit ignorant too, but Vigilante is far worse and a lot more mentally unstable. Speaking of which, he is very mentally unwell, just to some really bad degrees, as the show progresses in Season 2, you're going to be seeing that more and more, so just stay tuned for that. We also have Clemson Mern, who is a very, very important character in this season. He is the team leader with a dark secret, okay? That secret being that he is a butterfly, ladies and gentlemen, which we'll talk about what that is when we get to the villain section. But it's also important to note that he is also the High Evolutionary. Yeah, you heard that correctly. The villain from Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, played by the same actor. Don't know the actor's name off the top of my head. But either way, I noticed that immediately when they started promoting Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. So that's fun. So, of course, he must be good friends with James Gunn, the man, myth, the legend. But moving on from Mern, we then have Lieta Adebayo. This character also has a secret, that one being that she is the daughter of Amanda Waller, okay? It's not a deeply hidden secret. We find out about it at the end of episode 1 as an audience, but the characters in the show find out about it later on. She sort of has an opposite arc to Peacemaker, where as he's a tough guy becoming a softie, she's a softie becoming more of a tough guy, and that makes it for a really, really interesting dynamic, and it's really cool to see how those two characters can grow together and help sharpen each other. Then, of course, we have Amelia Harcourt, who, of course, is a kick-butt loner and is also Peacemaker's love interest throughout this series. She starts off being very closed off, very standoffish, but eventually that begins to soften up and she begins to open up with some people. Mostly Adebayo and Peacemaker himself, we kind of see a lot of character development happen there. Rounding off the 11th Street Kids, we have John Economos, aka Dyebeard. Why is he called Dyebeard, you might ask? Well, it's because he uses dye in his beard. Obviously. He cannot stand Peacemaker. He thinks Peacemaker is a piece of crap, and he kind of sort of is, but he's got many reasons to not like Peacemaker and Peacemaker not to like him, vice versa. They have some issues. They bicker a lot. His place on the team is he does computer hacky stuff, so he's, the guy in the chair, basically. And last but certainly not least, when it comes to very important characters on the good side, we have Eagly, who is Peacemaker's best friend and pet eagle. Very fun character, easily top 5 favorite animal sidekicks. But moving things along, as I mentioned before, we have 3 plots in this season. We have an A plot, a B plot, and a C plot. The A plot, of course, front and center, Peacemaker and an Argus-assigned team are tasked with fighting a new threat called the Butterflies. They defeat the Butterflies by destroying their only food source, known as the cow, ending the threat. Now, that's pretty straightforward. There's a lot of stuff going from point A to point B. Let's go and talk about that, though. So, the way that this kind of plays out is we're coming right off the heels of the Suicide Squad, as I keep bringing up multiple times. And Peacemaker is just getting out of the hospital after surviving the bullet that he took from Bloodsport in that movie. He gets out of the hospital, goes home, but is then visited by a few people, Vigilante being one of them, but then he shortly leaves. And then the team, later to be known as the 11th Street Kids, shows up. These kids basically say, hey, I know you're free, but we still have a little something planted in your neck from your previous endeavors with Argus. Therefore, you're still working for us. And what he's working to do is work freelance with the team to neutralize a threat known as the Butterflies, of which they do not know anything about at that moment. As things progress, they go to find out who the Butterflies are, being a butterfly-shaped alien creature that'll fly into your mouth or nose and basically take over your body. They've been on Earth for a long time and have kept hidden. However, recently, Goff, the leader of the Butterflies, okay, very important villain, has decided to start taking over and invading. However, Clemson Murn, who I brought him up earlier, okay, the team leader, we go to find out later on, is actually one of the Butterflies himself. He took one of the worst murderous people he could ever find, and he took over his body to use him to help the humans fight against the Butterflies from taking over and invading. And so that's the gist of that plot thread. It's really, really entertaining. The thing I really like about this too is Butterflies are an original villain made up by James Gunn, and it's a really nice concept, and so I think it really shows and flexes his originality chops, okay? You know, he can do some really great stuff. And that's the thing, too. Some people even complain about this, where James Gunn likes to take pre-established characters, especially not well-known pre-established characters, and kind of make them his own. We see that in the Suicide Squad. We see that with Guardians of the Galaxy, things like that. And so that's why some people were worried about Superman. I think, you know, you're fine with Superman. If you saw the movie, you're probably good. But seeing that he is capable to make such compelling and interesting villains, I think was a really, really good writing thing on his behalf. So gotta give credit where credit is due there. I will say, though, that plot is a little, simplistic, I will say. So it's not the most interesting and exciting thing I've ever watched. So I do have to knock it down a little bit there. But generally speaking, the A plot is still pretty good. I'm going to give it a good 8 out of 10. The B plot of the series goes a little something like this. Chris has a rocky relationship with his father. His father is a character known as the White Dragon. He is a gang leader of a bunch of almost neo-Nazi racist type people. They're not good guys. After one of Chris's crimes in the first episodes gets pinned on him thanks to Diebeard, he goes to jail and he gets super mad at Chris over it. After breaking out of jail, he gets his gang back together to go and attack Chris. They want to, take him out of the picture, if you catch my drift here, right? And they fail, and Chris does the same thing to his father, but that leaves him in the last episode kind of sort of haunted by his father's voice in his head. That's basically just the B plot. That's the other thing going on, and I think it's a really interesting B plot. I really like the White Dragon character, but I like him because he's terrible, similar to like an Eric Cartman sort of. It's like he's a terrible guy saying doing some terrible things, but like it's very fun to watch. You gotta admit that. And he's pretty compelling. I mean, not like the most compelling. He's not like Homelander compelling, but he's still definitely interesting to say the least. So I gotta give a little credit to that. I think the idea that he's got these, this gang is also really, really interesting and kind of helps him utilize some threats and things like that. I also have to mention, too, about Augie Smith, a.k.a. the White Dragon. Peacemaker's dad made him and his brother Keith fight as children, and in one of said fights, Chris knocks Keith the wrong way, unfortunately cutting his life short. And as a result, Chris is, of course, haunted with that, and he resents his father in many ways for that. But on the other hand, he also has a hard time because growing up, he felt like he always had to fight for his dad's approval. It also makes for interesting dynamics, especially given what I mentioned about Chris/Peacemaker earlier, where he's a tough guy who ends up becoming a bit more of a softie. He's wrestling with these kind of ideas as he's going through that, which makes for some good character development, I must say. But generally, as a plot, it's all right. It's good. I like it. Not quite as much as the main plot, but it is at least decent. So I'm going to go ahead and give that a 7 out of 10. And ladies and gentlemen, the C plot is with Adebayo as her and her significant other and their dogs are adjusting to a new career. She has a hard time balancing life and work. Also, she's the daughter of Amanda Waller. We mentioned that previously. This culminates in after her getting a deeper look at what her mom really does, she blows the lid on Task Force X, making it a known secret, if you will, and of course getting Amanda Waller herself in a lot of hot water. Now, this plot is, I think, easily the most boring of the three. I'm glad it's only the C plot then because of that. It's kind of compelling though. I think not so much that Adebayo is Waller's daughter, more that I think the fact that she's almost like a nobody everyman who's now getting thrown into this world of kind of like spies, espionage, danger, secret missions, that kind of stuff is very interesting stuff. I think that's what grips me the most about not just her character, but also, you know, the plot that she's going through. And, you know, she has a life. She has, you know, things for her outside of her career. And so it's really interesting to see that. Yeah, I don't know. It's decent. I mean, everything else is kind of dull, I think, to be quite honest, but I do really enjoy that she is an interesting character, like I said before. And like I said, her dynamic with Chris is also fantastic, and her dynamic with Harcourt is also really, really interesting to see because they're so different, but they're the only women on the team, and so they do have some sort of sisterhood as a result of that. But they each, you know, rub off on each other a little bit, and it kind of makes them both better people in the end. And so it is pretty good. It's pretty decent. But generally, plot number C, without a bio, I'm going to give that about a 6.5 out of 10. But yeah, not a whole lot to say there. But generally, ladies and gentlemen, that's the gist of Peacemaker Season 1. They set up some great characters, some great things going on. I don't know if they planned to do a second season per se after the first season, but there's a second season that at the time of this video coming out is in the process of being aired right now. Week by week, they're dropping new episodes. I, of course, have been watching. I'm very excited for it, and I will be dropping a Season 2 review after this one. But other than that, ladies and gentlemen, let's land this eagle. Peacemaker Season 1 is a good watch. I had a good time with it. I will say, though, if I have to point out some downsides, I mentioned a few things before. If you were watching the video by now, you should know that. Also, with James Gunn, he kind of goes off the rails here with some of his more raunchy humor, and there's just some moments where I'm just like, does that really need to be, or did that joke really need to be made? And they just kind of do that sometimes. So I gotta take away a little bit for that kind of stuff, but not that it made me overall hate or dislike the story. So generally speaking, Peacemaker Season 1, what do I give it? A scale from 1 out of 10. I'm gonna give Peacemaker Season 1 a 8 out of 10. And that is my review. What did you think of Peacemaker Season 1? Are you excited for Peacemaker Season 2? And hey, tell me this. What do you think of the Peacemaker Season 2 intro? Do you like it better? Do you think it's worse? I'm very curious because I do have some thoughts and opinions. I, of course, will be talking about that in the Season 2 review. So make sure you guys stick around and stay tuned for that. Hit that subscribe button if you want to see that because, trust me, you are not going to want to miss it. And hey, if I missed anything or anything that you think that I should talk about more that I have not yet with Peacemaker Season 1, drop it in the comments. I'd love to see that there. But in the meantime, ladies and gentlemen, I'm K Swope, and I will see you in the next one. Peace out.